because set free's on Tuesday nights. So now, hence, I had, now I'm the pastor of that, so I have to be there on Tuesday nights.
Well, I think that's wonderful.
All right, you're live.
Awesome. Hey, everybody, I'm Alison Emery, and I'm here today with Jennifer Felix. Jennifer Felix has a wonderful story to tell of redemption and resilience and restoration. And I'm so glad you're here today, Jennifer.
Thank you, Alison.
Welcome. So let's just get right into it. Tell me about your childhood.
Oh, that's pretty broad. That's
Okay.
a loaded question.
What was your family like?
Well, on the outside, you would probably look at my family as your typical stereotype middle-class Caucasian family. You're just standard white family, right?
Okay.
Lived next to a park, had 2 brothers and a sister, mom and dad. Everything on the surface appeared to be like status quo until it wasn't.
Oh.
Because you had things under the surface that were happening. Mm-hmm. And so growing up, we have nothing to compare it to when we're kids. And so as kids, we just think what we're experiencing is the normal, right? And then as we start looking around, we start then comparing it to other families, which is our closer network of friends.
Sure.
Now in my life, in my story, what happened is my mom, everything was fine. Just as typical family, you get in trouble once in a while, but overall everything's fine. And then it snapped on a dime, and it wasn't okay. My mom started becoming very angry. She started becoming very abusive in a physical sense. And she didn't, and again, we're looking at it through the lens of an adult now. And so when you go back and you try to look at it through the lens of a child, I speak as if I understood what was happening then. But it's impossible.
Didn't. Sure.
It's impossible to understand that.
What happened? Did your mother have a mental break? Was it alcoholism?
No. My mother grew up in an alcoholic family. She was an only child. But she didn't even know initially what was happening. Ultimately, by the time I was 9, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Oh.
And so the disease was a fairly new disease. And so they didn't know near as much as what they know now about it. But she would have fits of rage that just made no sense.
Oh.
And things that when you look back and you're like, okay, all I did was not take the trash back out to the backyard from the curb. Mm-hmm. That didn't constitute like a beating. But it was enough to tip her over the edge. And so it wasn't just me, it was me and my siblings. And when I was 8 years old also, so it all kind of like ties in together. When I was 8 was the first time that I was sexually touched in an inappropriate way. Not knowing what it means, not knowing any of it, I think children, for some reason, just have this innate feeling or thinking or believing. I don't know what you would call it, but it's, I can't tell anybody. Like, for some reason, you know that it's not right, but not to the extent of being able to tell anybody.
I understand completely. I had the same experience.
And so you got 8 years old, I'm learning things about my sexuality that I should have never learned at 8.
Right.
Then I'm learning things about my sexuality that involve not another person, but myself, because now
There's questions.
There's questions.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm also experiencing anger and rage and uncertainty and a lot of things. You don't even know what questions to ask when you're getting hit. You just want it to stop. And when it doesn't stop, you start asking, why isn't it stopping? And then you have times in which the person doing it, which is my mom, she starts falling down in the midst of it, and now she can't move. Did I do it? Did I cause it? Was I not good enough? Now I have to feel sorry for her, but I want to feel sorry for me. But if I feel sorry for me and I'm angry at her, you have guilt, you have shame, you have what's going on.
It's a terrible dynamic.
It's like a train wreck. And, and we didn't understand. We didn't know that she had MS. We didn't know why she was angry. We didn't know. We just knew these things were happening. Yeah. We lived next to a park. There was a lot of kids on our street. I was a kid that I was born cross-eyed. So I had braces. Well, I had glasses. I had 3 surgeries. I was born with not straight teeth. So I had buck teeth. My mom had this short haircut, which now all of a sudden I don't even feel like a girl. So I'm hanging out with all the boys, but the boys get to a point where they realize I'm a girl, And I just want to fit in. I just want to be liked. Ultimately, I believe what it was is I wanted to be loved. But at that age, you don't know how to articulate it. And you don't even know what love is supposed to look like. And it becomes distorted.
Absolutely true.
And again, I'm articulating this as a 50-year-old woman, not as an 8, 9, 10-year-old child. I just knew that things were one way and now they weren't. Everything had changed. We grew up in the church. My parents took us to church, but it was in the generation of everything has to look okay because we have to be the perfect family. So you don't talk about your problems. You don't tell anybody about your problems.
Oh, I identify with that so much.
You just don't talk about it. And the friends that I was keeping, I had a best friend whose stepfather, who he wound up adopting her, he ended up being a very bad alcoholic, and it was a very unhealthy dynamic. And so we went back and forth, and it was just a lot of craziness. And when I say craziness, I mean you're not talking mental health things. You're talking dynamics of circumstances where the whirlwind of what was happening was just, it was insanity. It made no sense. By the time I was 12, I had been sexually abused by 2-3 different people. All I wanted was to get into the youth group at the church because that looked like it was something that was perfect, right? And at 12, I finally got in. You hit the 7th grade, you're in. It's a small church. I wanted to spend every breathing, waking moment of my time there. And if I wasn't there, I was looking forward to when I would be. Join the choir, just everything I could do, I did. And again, it was another circumstance where everything was good until it wasn't. My parents weren't going to pay for me to attend camp twice, and I wanted to attend twice because I could attend once as a camper and once as a helper. The church offered to pay my way, and I in turn had to go to the church and work and kind of work off what they were going to pay. So I would take a bus down there every single Wednesday, and I would help. There was a time, I'm sure they still have it now. It's just the churches where there was a house on the property, and typically the pastor would live there. Well, the senior pastor had his own home. He had his own place. So there was another family living there, and the I guess father would take care of the grounds, clean the church, clean the bathrooms, clean all that stuff. So when I went, I was helping him. His wife would be at work. There was 3 kids. I think they were stepchildren. After several weeks of working there, though, I would have dinner at their house, and then I'd walk over for choir practice, and somebody would take me home. And then one Wednesday night when I was at his house, he decided he wanted to touch me. And everything changed. I had already experienced that before. Everything changed. And so I went several hours with him molesting me. And he never, I guess I minimized it for years and years and years because there was actually no sexual intercourse type of thing. So I just minimized it. And I think, well, it wasn't that bad. It was
But he took away your safety.
Right.
This safe place that you'd created for yourself
right.
was now gone.
Well, and I didn't think that things could get worse, but they did. And so I did what I normally do, and I didn't tell anybody. By the time he was ready to escort me to the back bedroom, choir practice was starting, and so people were knocking on the door. And so that was like my saving grace. And years later, you're talking into my 30s, I found out that he had been raping his stepchildren in that same house. Ugh. And so I'm sure had there not been a knock on the door, it would have landed at that point. Because I didn't know how to say no. You're 12. Yeah. I hadn't said no when I was 8, 9, or 10. Why would I say no at 12? And several weeks in, after that had happened, the youth pastors started, I guess, and again, this is just after years of discovery, found out that at that time they called me and they said something's not right and we want to know what it is. The youth pastors were husband and wife, and they were like, something's not right. And apparently, I don't remember a lot of this, but apparently I took on a bad attitude and started talking about how churches and people in churches were hypocrites and you can't trust them. And so I flipped on a dime myself. What was once a place where I was extremely happy was now a place I was extremely angry.
Right.
And so they started inquiring, and over the phone I was talking with the wife, and she somehow, I don't know the whole dynamics of the conversation, is I said, yeah, something happened. Yeah, and yes, this is where it happened. And I don't even remember how much detail I went into, like, because you just push it, you compartmentalize. If I ignore it, it didn't happen.
So did she hear you? Did she respond appropriately?
Well, this is where things really went bad. She said she was going to set up a meeting with the senior pastor. So I said, okay. So they set up a meeting. Now remember, I'm 12. In that meeting was her and her husband. They were the youth pastors. The senior pastor, the man who touched me, and me. And that was it. And then I was told, because there was no actual sexual intercourse, that it would be best if I don't tell my parents and I don't tell anybody, and the church would handle it moving forward. I walked out of that room changed.
Oh, yeah, that was immoral.
And at that point, it confirmed everything that I already believed about myself. That the world isn't safe, family's not safe, church isn't safe. And if I did something, if everything was like my fault, and I just walked out devastated. And then not only was it, the idea of this wasn't, it just didn't end there, because the next time I was in the youth group, that guy was still allowed to serve. So I had to see him, and then I had to see his wife. And I remember the feeling of shame. And they still got to serve, but nobody ever came and said, how are you doing? So
devastating.
I just was like, okay, well, I didn't talk about it when it happened before, so I guess what makes this place any different? There's no difference. So I tried to keep going. I tried to make the best of it, but I started drinking. I started smoking. It just didn't matter. And that wasn't the last sexual encounter that I had as a child. There's some things that I just don't share for the sensitivity of those involved. But it wasn't the last time. The last time there was penetration, and it just was devastating. And so at that point, I just said, screw it. Like, I can party, I can drink. By this point, my mom's diagnosed. I'm 12. She's diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. You know, her up and down emotions, home is uncertain. Just get me out of just get me away from here.
Yeah, Calgon, take me away.
Right. Get me away. And so, so when I was 12, that's when I had my first encounter with smoking marijuana, had my first encounter with drinking. My best friend's father's an alcoholic. We could have, my grandfather's an alcoholic. And so, we could sneak beer from him. I mean, he offered me and my siblings, I know I was around 6 or 7 when I had beer for the first time.
Whoa.
And he was a drunk. And I learned early on, I cannot share any negative, bad experiences, feelings, emotions, anything. And I didn't know how to share them in a healthy way. So anytime a crack or a small little door would open to share them, I remember being told, your feelings don't matter. You get told that enough, you're like, okay, it's my fault. I'm not good enough. My feelings don't matter. And then ultimately it becomes, I'm going to like you, but ultimately screw you. And you're going to be at arm's distance and bring it on. I'll take the weight of the world and it's okay.
Wow.
So by the time I was 15, fast forwarding, my mom left my dad for another man. She was in a wheelchair at this time. She was still able to drive. I woke up one morning and she was gone. And the other man had multiple sclerosis, but mom was gone. Now, there's a lot of other dynamics to get into, but by sensitivity, my siblings had their own way of dealing with things that were just as unhealthy as my ways. And they had consequences that they had to endure just like me. Like, I don't have any kids. I've never been pregnant. I don't want to say I was opposed to having kids, but let's just say it wasn't something I went to pursue. I had a difficult time connecting with.
I think that's probably pretty understandable given your circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the time I was 15, now I'm like full-blown partying. I learned the dynamics of stealing when I was like in the 4th, 5th grade. I should have known then that I had addictive behavior because I was like, well, I'll only take 10 out of my mom's wallet. And it was all, well, maybe I'll just take 20. By the time I was done, I had gone back to her wallet and taken everything. I should have just taken everything on the first trip to her wallet.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and so, but I didn't understand so much of the dynamics of what I was feeling. And you're talking, I was born in 1969. So,
And so your mom is gone.
my mom is gone. My dad is working full time. And
you're 15.
And I'm 15. So now you're just kind of like, as long as you're not causing higher stress for dad, like report cards. I mean, I got an F in PE. And he's like, how do you do that? Easily. You show up and you don't suit up and you do nothing. Like, it's not hard to get an F. It really is really simple. And so I went about the remainder. I think I was 16. I must have been like a sophomore, I think. I went about the rest of my high school days just kind of partying. It was interesting. By the time I was a senior in high school, let's back up for a minute. I wound up in a youth group that was out of Long Beach. That these individuals were people that probably had a closer idea of what I was experiencing and feeling. Because, see, even though it looked like I was on the right side of the tracks and it looked like they were growing up on the wrong side of the tracks, we actually had very similar experiences.
How interesting.
So I wound up dating a guy that we wound up having sex in a church. We wound up just doing, it was just partying. And it just kind of grew from there. But some of the leaders in there thought, this girl needs to get into counseling. So they got me into counseling in this place called Straight Talk that was in Fountain Valley. My dad wanted no part of it. No part of it. So when it came to family counseling, there was none. It was just me saying, okay, I'm still partying, but okay, I don't know why I continued to go, but I did. And then the school, my high school, decided that I needed to be in some kind of a program. So they placed me in a program inside the school where once a week now I'm going to this counseling thing.
Okay.
And so I'm going to these counseling things, and see, by the time I was 16, I walked away from Jesus. So the whole thing was, if you wanted to believe and see Jesus, like, we're not friends. Like, I might have been a part of a youth group, but I was not friends with Jesus. I was like, I'm like, he's all loving, all caring, all powerful. Well, he didn't do jack for me. So that was a squashing kind of a thing. The youth pastors, when I was 12, wound up quitting and moving out of state. For 18 years, they apologized to me every time we had contact. And I didn't understand why. I had just blocked that out. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, I just blocked that out. So I'm doing these drug program things, but I can't seem to stay clean. And then by the time I'm 17, junior high school, I'm like, well, maybe I'll give this clean thing a try. By the time I was 15, though, I was introduced to AA for the first time because of the programs. You walk in when you're 15 and you see old timers in there.
Right.
It's like, yes, I haven't been drinking for like 50 years. Sorry. My life is kind of screwed up, though.
Yeah.
Like, how screwed up can life be at 15, right? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, I don't want to live. Like, I don't want to live.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that I want to die. Not wanting to live doesn't mean that I want to die. It just means I don't want to feel the way I'm feeling, but I don't know how to get out of my own skin.
And so for a while, the drugs helped with that.
Yeah, and if you were to articulate and say, oh, well, you were getting high because you were sexually abused, I'm like, I'm getting high because it feels good.
Yeah, but now the statistics coming out are really showing that childhood trauma, or trauma in general, but especially childhood trauma, is really a precursor to substance abuse. Like, if you have childhood trauma, you're way more likely to have some type of an addiction issue.
Oh, yeah.
Way. I mean, like, way.
Well, I was 15. Like, there's a lot of little details in my story that are really kind of fascinating. When I was 15, I got friends at my house. A good friend of mine, she had a boyfriend who AWOL'd from jail in Texas, hitchhiked out to California, and we're making homemade crank and partying.
Gosh.
At my parents' house, and she got some Indian ink, and he said, I know how to give tattoos. And I'm like, well, that sounded like a genius idea. Of course, I'm the only one who got a couple, because I couldn't just one. I'm like, we have to do more than one, because one just doesn't make sense to me. I'm the only one that day and they were like really dumb tattoos.
What were they?
Oh my God, I got a little cross on my arm and then a little reaper, like skull reaper thing on my back. And I thought, that's genius. Everybody else said, I think I'm going to wait. So now I'm the only one with it. I was like, really? I was kind of the one that just kind of like, yeah, let's do it. And, by the time I was 17, I got more homemade tattoos and tried to do the whole cover-ups.
Well, you've got a bunch of tattoos now, girl. You are beautiful all over.
This is nothing compared to what I have. So there's a lot of things in my story where I was just kind of like, by the time I was 17, I'm telling a therapist I want to kill myself. So now you got the 5150, and by this time I'm driving, and now she's saying I got to call 911, and I'm like, what you got to do is back the hell up.
Right.
Because I am not going on a 5150. So then I'm getting in the van, I'm driving this van, and I'm driving all around Fountain Valley. And now I got Fountain Valley Police Department after me because they've... And of course they catch up to me because,
Because they do.
And I'm only 17. It's like, and a black and white Dodge van, you're not exactly inconspicuous, right?
So did they 5150 you?
No, I had to sit on the curb and I had the officers and then they're calling my dad and my dad shows up. And at that point, but you got to remember, it's not that I didn't want to live. I didn't want to live. But I didn't want to die.
Oh yeah, I get that completely.
And but my dad's there, and now all of a sudden it takes me like the gates just flood open enough. I can't share how I feel because my feelings don't matter. I can't tell you what's going on. My whole life is about a secret. Everything that goes on in my head is a secret. And now I just told somebody, but now I got the cops in front of me. And I'm 17, but I don't know how to articulate all this. So my dad's all like, what's going on? Nothing, Dad. It's just an overreaction. Because you don't know how to. He's wanting you to get close, but if you were to share with him exactly how you feel, and it's not that my dad was
devastate him.
Well, it's not that he's a bad guy, but you got to remember then, he takes that as a value statement, as he's a bad dad.
Right.
And I've been there. And now how does he respond? Because his dad was an alcoholic too. Both of my grandfathers were alcoholics. How does he respond? I don't want to hear it. Because I've been there. You start getting close to the chest, close to the heart on what's going on in him. He now responds back with aggression. And your feelings don't matter. I don't want to hear it. We're not... And because I remember having the conversation about doing counseling. Our problems are our problems. And if we have something to talk about, it'll be inside the house. But my house, my rules. My house, my kingdom. My house, your feelings. It was a different time. Mm-hmm. And then it was, my feelings don't matter. And now it's, okay, like I just can't let him know. And it was interesting for years. I couldn't understand. Even when I was 30 years old and getting ready to marry my second husband, I could not walk into my dad's house and let him see all my tattoos. I mean, I didn't have all these, but I did have half sleeves. I did have my legs covered. And I'm like, I'm 30 years old and I'm terrified for my dad to like.
Yes, we don't want to disappoint our dads. I don't
think it was disappointment. I think it was shame of myself.
Oh, I see.
This had nothing, I don't had anything to do with what his feelings were. I think it had to do everything with me.
Right. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah. And now I'm like, I can't let people see the real me. In fact, I don't even know who the real me is. Like, in fact, if you asked who the real me is, I go, what day is it? Because the real me could change. I had to be the chameleon depending upon the circumstance, who I was around.
Well, what started your eventual transformation? Because today,
we haven't even touched on the insanity of my life.
Oh, yeah? All right, well, keep it coming then.
I'm like, so I got clean. In between 17 and 18, I was clean through Narcotics Anonymous.
Okay.
Did meetings. It was fantastic. It was a wonderful thing. I had a lot of friends. I was in Orange County.
It was a good time for you.
It was a good time. By the time I was 18, I met a 38-year-old man who'd been slamming heroin for 20 years. And we immediately started having sex regularly. I remember taking 1 year clean on like October 22nd, and by November 1st, I was getting high. And at this point, my whole drug use went to a whole different level. Just went to a different level. I didn't stick a needle in my arm. At one point, he was willing to stick the needle in my arm for me to try that. The first go around, I was terrified. The second go around, he wouldn't do it. But I snorted so much cocaine, it was insane. My nose was going to fall off. I was hallucinating. He had OD'd in my dad's house. We're on the freeway and he is driving. I'm holding the steering wheel while he's sticking a needle in his arm. It just was, life got to be insane fast. And for the next 8 months, I did more drugs in 8 months than I had done in the 18 years I was alive. He wound up quitting his job. He was a health inspector in LA because of drug use. Right. Go figure. He wound up getting his entire retirement because he had quit. It was in LA County worker. We went through over $20,000 in 8 months just doing cocaine, running the streets of LA, people that were just living on the streets. We were sleeping in his car. We were like, I just lied to my dad about everywhere. We were living in motels, sleeping in the car. I was not showering. It was just, that was a time of insanity. And we wound up in a motel room in Stanton. He had OD'd. I wound up calling 1-800-COCAINE. I don't even know if that number is still valid. Do you remember that number? Like 1-800-COCAINE. And I'm telling him, I'm like, look, I am hearing things and seeing things. I would look like at a cup sitting just on a table, and it would look like it was moving. I would sit on the edge of a bed or sit in this chair, and it felt like the whole floor was shaking, like we were having an earthquake. And I'm like I thought demons were after me. It just was so. My boyfriend, he's coming out of the bathroom, out of the motel, running around the motel naked, just saying that people were chasing him. He had the people of the motel running around the motel. He's coming out dressed like a woman, long eyelashes, makeup, lipstick, dress, high heels, and I'm sitting there like, I'm not sure what's happening here, but I need to do more drugs. Like,
whoa.
It just, and when I called the number, they told me, they were like, well, you've done so much that you're temporarily brain damaged. And I remember that this wasn't just snorting cocaine. Like, my nose is dripping blood and I'm snorting cocaine. So it's immediately going in my blood because every vessel in my nose was broken. It was just insane.
Wow. That's a picture.
And I remember we were lying, cheating, stealing, anything we could do to get high. At this point in time, having sex to get money to get high was nothing. It was, I need to get high. And if you're my means to do it, then I'll do what's necessary. But if you're not going to give me money, then get out of my way. And if you leave your wallet on the table, shame on you, because I'll take it. And then I'll help you look for it.
Yeah, I find that people under the influence will do things that their moral compass would never allow them to do ordinarily.
I had no moral. I had a job that I should have been fired at. But my boss knew. This was probably one of those God's working in my life, even though I'm not, I'm not asking him to, right? Everybody at my job, they were telling her she needed to fire me because I wasn't showing up. I was getting high in the bathroom. When I was there, I wasn't showering. And she was like, the only positive thing this girl has in her life is this place. If keeping her on staff, she's hourly. So when she's not here, she doesn't get paid. But it's not costing us anything to love her. And they didn't fire me. There were so many resentments because people got fired after I got clean for way less. And it was just like, I think it was Jesus sending somebody with skin on.
That's awesome.
And I just didn't want anything to do with Jesus. I was a person in the NA meetings. I'd get up and walk out if you talked about Jesus. I'm not in church. And so it's kind of funny, I'm a pastor now, so that gets to be a funny story. So I don't even know how long we've gone on this yet. But when people want to know my story, I'm like, there's a lot of details in there.
Yeah.
And so I'm 19 years old now. My mom has come back into the picture, right? She's coming and visiting multiple times. But when I was 19, me and the gentleman I was with, he was 38 still. So I had turned 19 and he was 38. We were in a motel room and we had no money. And at this point in time, I mean, we're doing like multiple 8 balls a day. What is a little line gonna do, right? Like, we wound up meeting this older gentleman, and I say older, he's probably in his, I don't know, 60s, gray hair, old. I mean, but he's getting high, so maybe he was only 40 or 50, and he just looked horrible, right?
Right.
But it was him and his son, and they had some coke, but they didn't have the rig. We had the rig, right? So they came into our room, and my boyfriend allowed them to use the rig. And so this older gentleman and his son are slamming in our motel room.
Can I stop you for a minute? Because we've got some terms that some of our audience might not know. We've used 8 ball.
Yeah.
We've used slamming.
And 8 balls, 3.5 grams of cocaine. That's a good amount of cocaine. That's a lot of cocaine for just 2 people. And we were doing at least 7 grams a day.
Yeah. And then slamming is?
Using a needle intravenously. That's
okay, great.
You're using a needle. Yeah. So you have this gentleman and his son using my boyfriend's needle.
Oh, that was the other thing, rig.
The rig is when a filled needle. You're taking it's filled. It's ready to go.
It's ready to go.
Ready to go. Right?
So we know those terms, but lots of people don't.
So it's ready to go, and so they shoot up. That might be a phrase that most people would know.
Yeah.
The street slang is slam.
Right.
And so then they give us ours, and so we split ours. And again, my nose is bleeding. I'm snorting it. My boyfriend now is shooting up. And I know many people don't know, but with cocaine, you are chasing, the slang word is you're chasing the dragon, because the moment you do one, it's not like you sit there and you're good for 8 hours. You get the immediate rush, and then you have to have that rush again, and you chase it the rest of your time. So one more time, I find myself on the floor picking at the carpet, picking for more, and sticking whatever I can in my nose as he's sticking whatever he can in the needle, in the rig, because it's not really necessarily in the needle. It goes in the little plastic thing that then, it runs it through the needle.
Right.
And I remember, I don't know why or for what reason this happened, but I had a moment of clarity in that moment where I just stopped. I don't know. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been an hour. It could have been hours of me on that carpet looking for more. And here I am looking at this older guy and his son. I'm looking at my boyfriend. I'm 19 years old. And I just start crying. I just am devastated. I'm like, I am going to die doing this. And there's not enough here to satisfy my craving. We have no money. And I don't have the effort, the energy to go do what it is that I need to do to go get what I need. And what I need is not a line. What I need is an 8 ball. What I need is 3.5 grams. What I need, there's not enough of. And I'm just devastated. And my boyfriend looks at me, and I look at him, and I go, I can't do this anymore. We owe the motel. We have no means of paying the motel. They're going to kick us out. I'm like, what are we going to do? So then the older gentleman and his son leave. And it's like I see the future of my life. So then my boyfriend and I sit there and we're like, we have to figure out a plan. Now, in the course of this, when I was in high school, I wound up with a $500 scholarship for college. So I had signed up to go to Golden West College.
Okay.
Now, I never showed up for classes, and so I had straight Fs.
Oh, gosh.
That's another story. I wound up getting kicked out of Golden West. But I had purchased books with this scholarship, and I still had these books. So we went and sold the books back to the college, came up with some money, and we were able to, I don't even know if that was it. Like, there might have been other means of coming up with money, but we had to pay the motel. We had like a tab going.
Yeah.
So we paid the motel, and then we found a recovery home called Cooper Fellowship that was in Santa Ana. It was all men. And so my boyfriend went into Cooper Fellowship, and I just showed back up at my dad's. Like, it's not as if I moved out of my dad's. I was just like not ever home. Like, it's not like I said, Dad, I don't live here. I just said, I'm not going to be home for a week. I'm going to be staying at a friend's. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be here. And, and then when he would see me, I'd just be getting high back in my bedroom. But there was not like, so I still had a place to live. I just wasn't there.
Got it.
So I went back to my dad's, and I couldn't see Jim, I don't know, like for 30 days or 60 days,
No contact.
Right, that first no contact. So then I go back to the NA meetings, and it's really kind of interesting because rewinding, at 18, I started learning what it meant just to have casual sex with friends.
Okay.
Friends with benefits, right? Well, I have no contact with Jim, but I'm not ready to give up sex. So I'm back in NA doing what we do in NA. You have sex, right? And I'm like, look, this isn't a relationship. You're just satisfying a craving. And some of these people had time. They should have known better. And, and I just now, I understood the whole cliche, 90 meetings in 90 days. Be of service, get a sponsor. But I just didn't want to do drugs. I was not in any place to work on the issues of my childhood, of the abuse.
Right.
I just didn't want to do drugs, And so, but I started being of service, started getting, developing friends.
Yeah.
After the 30 days or 60-day period, Jim and I started being able to see each other. When I was 19, also, it was somewhere in this time frame, I came home one day and Mom was back. The guy she was living with ended up dying. And she was a complete quadriplegic by this time. And my parents had never separated. Never divorced. So my dad took her back. And so now Mom's home. And it was okay. But she's a complete quadriplegic. So what are you going to do? Tell her, like, I hate you, I'm angry at you, let's talk about feelings. Remember, I'm still in the wheelhouse of my feelings don't matter.
Right.
I'm still in the wheelhouse of the guilt, the shame, it's all my fault. And I'm looking at her as a complete quadriplegic, now saying, I have to have grace for you. But in order to have grace for you, I have to minimize the anger in me.
And you're still pretty young at this time.
I'm 19.
Yeah. So that's a lot of expectation to put on a 19-year-old.
I, for some reason, started having this mantra in me of, I can take it, I can handle it. Whatever you dish out, I can take it and I can handle it. And if enough isn't enough, just keep adding on the weight, right? Wow. We haven't even gotten to we're still 10 years away or 11 years away before me becoming a Christian. How? Because if you think that I went back to a life of insanity after 7 years being clean. I got highly involved in Narcotics Anonymous. By the time I was 21, Jim, that was his name, he was 41, we broke up. He wound up getting a girlfriend that was more along the lines of his age.
Okay, good for him.
Good for him, right?
Yeah.
And but I didn't know how not to be in a relationship. I didn't know how not to have a guy with me. When I was around 22, there was a lot of casual sex. I just hey, we'll just have sex. If we're together, fine. If we're not, fine.
Probably trying to meet the same kind of needs that the drugs and alcohol were trying to meet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, just make me feel better,
The tattoos started getting in more of my wheelhouse. Shopping got more in my wheelhouse. Anything that I could obsess on and focus on. I'm smoking 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. If you tell me not to say the F word, I said it more. It became an everyday part of my language. I'd say it so much that even people in meetings started counting how many times I said it.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say it so much. And I didn't know how not to say it. There were just things I didn't know how to do. And so when I started even working steps, I didn't know how to put in there the abuse. I just was like, I'm powerless over drugs and my life is unmanageable. I didn't know how to deal with any of the other stuff. And then people are like, well, we're looking for patterns. I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean patterns? The only pattern I have is people didn't know how to not to touch me. And like, yeah, I was powerless over that.
Right.
I didn't know how to say no. And shame on me. You know, the old saying is, do it to me once, shame on you. Do it to me twice, shame on me. Mm-hmm. Well, I took that to heart when it came to now it's a shame on me because I'm not saying anything. I'm not telling you no. I'm not running away. I'm and now it became my fault.
Right. Did you feel like a magnet for these kind of people? Yeah. Because I remember at one point thinking, man, do I have something on my forehead that says over here, you know?
Yeah, and I knew that my parents, to their best ability, loved me. I mean, I had 3 eye surgeries as a kid to correct my vision.
And the braces.
And I had braces for over 4 years to correct the teeth issue I had going on. So I knew that my parents did things that would demonstrate love. Unfortunately, they had their own set of generational things that happened to them. And again, I don't want to make an excuse and minimize what happened to me, but it's
But they were both raised in alcoholic homes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And boy, that really affects and changes the way a person relates to the world.
Well, my mom was an only child, and my grandfather was not only mean and nasty, but it just was horrible. My mom was sexually abused as well, that I had later found out about. My dad was the oldest of 5 kids, and his dad was a womanizer, and he wound up having multiple affairs, cheating on my grandmother, divorcing my grandmother, remarrying my grandmother, divorcing her again, and then marrying another woman. I don't know for certain, and maybe I was told and I just don't recall, if he had an affair with this other woman that he ultimately wound up marrying. Right. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. We weren't close. But my dad, my dad and my mom, neither of them became alcoholics because they chose that wasn't going to be the life that they wanted.
Right.
But my dad has a couple brothers who wound up being alcoholics, a sister that was a drug addict and an alcoholic. One of my uncles, years back tried to commit suicide. So there's depression, there's bipolar in the wheelhouse. And so did my dad have any diagnosed thing? Well, no. But see, mental health now there's more an awareness to it now than there was.
And certainly back in those days, they didn't even talk about it.
Right.
Especially if a man was experiencing emotional struggles, that was definitely something you would keep on the down low.
You kept it very on the down low.
Unfortunately, because of stigma, it was a shameful thing, as though somehow a person with a mental health issue is of low moral character or, not smart enough or hardworking enough to get themselves out of it. Fortunately, I think that stigma is really changing now, and people are realizing mental health issues are like any other health issues.
Right. Now, I mean, if we wanted to fast forward to when I became a Christian, that's when I was 30. But my life got even more insane in my 20s.
It's hard to believe.
Because I wasn't ready to deal with the core.
And so in your 30s, you'd gotten married?
Well, in my 20s, I got married.
You got married in your 20s?
Right, so I've been divorced.
Okay, and married again in your 30s. Okay, gotcha.
By the time I was 22, 23 years old, well, first I had a career change and I started doing sales, and I became highly successful at it. I started making more money than I ever should have made at that age, and I started spending more money than I ever had. But I met this gentleman when I was about 23. Didn't know how to be faithful, but then I decided that I didn't want to live that life, and so I decided if I'm in a relationship, I'm going to be faithful because that's who I want to be. It had nothing to do with Christian values. It had everything to do with this is who I want to be. So by the time I was 23 and I started dating this gentleman, I mean, I've only been with 2 men now since that time, and both of them wound up being my husbands. Mm. But that was a decision I made back then. When I was 22, I decided I wanted to stop smoking. I couldn't breathe. I was walking like I'd walk a block and I'd be out of breath and I was wheezing.
At 22.
Right.
Wow.
So I started getting into exercise. And again, it became compulsive. I was every day and it was compulsive. I started doing martial arts and doing kung fu. I wanted to be able to beat people up and not go to jail. And I could fight every single day of the week in kung fu and not go to jail. And then people could hit me. And it felt good when people hit me. And I started saying, I enjoy this pain and this aggression and I'm not going to jail and I'm not having a 5150 on me.
Mm-hmm. I think we should define 5150 at this point for people that don't know.
5150 is when you say that's a suicidal terminology and saying you want to kill yourself.
It's a legal term.
Yes.
For a 3-day hold on someone who is either a danger to themselves or others, or they're gravely disabled.
Yeah.
That's a 5150.
And that's when the law can step in, and there's what's called mandated reporting.
Right.
Reporters, people in the school system, government, agencies, police officers. Anytime you express that you want to hurt yourself, someone else in that way, they are mandated by law to have you evaluated for a 3-day, 72-hour hold. And unless they determine otherwise through the course of the initial interview. When it happened to me when I was around 16, 17 years old, it was through the course of that initial interview. I believe that I was able to backpedal enough, and because my dad was there to take me home, that it was determined I didn't need to be.
Do you think you should have been, though? Would it have helped you at that point or no?
On one hand, I think it would have helped to the degree that it would have opened the door for maybe conversation. On the other hand, was I ready to have that conversation? I don't think that was in my wheelhouse.
A mental emergency room is not the most pleasant place for a fully adult person. For a 19-year-old, wow. It would be a lot.
Yeah. So anyways, by the time I'm 22, I'm starting my tattoo run. So now I'm at Laguna Tattoo like every 2-3 weeks. Like I'm there constantly. Yeah, and by this time now I'm making more money. And it's something that I can better afford, so I can have the professional ones done.
Yeah.
I was 18 when I had my first professional, but I didn't have another professional one done until I was like 22. Homemade ones, yes. Professional, no. But anyway, so I meet Tony, 23, and we date on and off, and we're together. By the time I think I'm like around 24 and a half, 25, somewhere in there. Now, you understand, I met Tony when he was fresh out of prison, sleeping on a couch in a recovery home, no job, no car, no driver's license, no money, no nothing. And I'm like, you're the one.
Perfect.
Right? And you have problems? That's okay.
I can fix you.
Right. Can focus on you rather than me.
Exactly.
Right?
That's a great game plan.
Great game plan. So, and then I go to my parents and I'm like, hey, look, he needs a place to live. So he moves in with me. Now, my parents, it's really just kind of funny. My parents still had this moral compass of, but you can't sleep in the same room. Okay. So Tony had his own room. Like, we couldn't sleep in the same room. And so but he lived with us he lived at with me and my parents for a year till him and I moved out. When I was 25, through the Kung Fu studio, I wound up going to China for 3 weeks and training.
Neat.
And so that was and it was interesting because that was, again, an exposure I had to Buddhism when I went. And I'm like, okay, I might not be all like keen on this Jesus thing, but this Buddha thing looks a little bit more crazy to me too. And when I mean crazy, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you have a statue that you're putting incense in or like lighting, and then you got like a dish of food. That statue's not going to eat food. It just didn't make sense to me. So I was like, I might not worship Jesus, but I'm not going to bow to a statue either. That just doesn't seem right. I'm like, can somebody eat that food? Like, no, we're waiting for Buddha to eat it. Well, he ain't going to eat it because he's a rock.
That's right. So Buddha wasn't for you.
Buddha wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. Religion wasn't for me, and I knew Jesus wasn't for me, but Buddha wasn't for me. I knew the 12 steps that was okay. And having a higher power and a God of my own understanding was okay because that put me in the driver's seat and that put me in control of who God was in my life. I needed to
Okay.
be in control of who God was in my life.
Okay.
And as long as I didn't do drugs, God would let me do whatever it is I wanted to otherwise.
Oh.
So I still didn't know what it meant to not lie, to not cheat, to not be dishonest. I didn't, all I knew is I wasn't doing those things to get drugs.
Right. Wow, that's profound.
So I didn't necessarily have still the moral compass of what that meant. I knew that I didn't want to have sex with multiple guys. And it didn't mean that I wasn't going to have sex. It just meant that if I was with one guy, then I was just with one guy.
Right.
And so there was still, I still struggled with that in working with steps. I still struggled with that too. But I thought, as long as I'm not getting high, it's okay, because I'm walking in meetings. And you gotta remember, we get validated in meetings all the time for things that we should never be validated for.
So true.
I'm getting a tattoo every other week, and everybody's telling me how cool it is. But what nobody's asking me is why. Because all they see is a tattoo. They don't see the pain. They don't see the perpetual.
That is seriously profound.
They don't see the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And but I didn't know how to deal with pain, emotional pain. I just compartmentalized. I'm going to live in my head, and my heart has to go somewhere else. I can't do this.
Okay.
And so Tony and I, when I was 25, we moved out and got an apartment. And I decided that we had spent more money than I could make. And so he was working at Fry's Electronics at this point and doing well. I still was doing sales, and if we didn't have the debt, we would have been doing well, but we had this debt. So I'm like, hey, what happens if we sell drugs?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that.
Let's do that. And he was like, yeah, I still got some connections in Santa Ana. And he's like, we could probably do some burglaries too. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And so we started doing burglaries and breaking into businesses and stealing and fencing items. And in Santa Ana, we would case places that if there was, and you understand, this is what he had gone to prison for, was grand theft auto and burglaries. We would find businesses that had a business next to it that was vacant. You'd break into the vacant business and then bust a hole through the wall and go to the...
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we started doing that. We started selling, and I'm like, okay, we can't sell cocaine because then I'm going to want to do it. So as long as if we have any other drug, I'm going to, I don't need to get high. I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. And, but I remember we had a party when we first moved out at the apartment, like a little housewarming party. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I wonder what it would be like if I took a drink of alcohol. And so he put a little bit in one of my drinks, and I had a drink. And I remember the guilt that came over me because I had about 6.5 years clean. And I was also like the chairperson for the area service office for Narcotics Anonymous in Orange County. But remember, I didn't have the moral compass, to be honest. And I was like, okay, we're not going to tell anybody that I just did that. And he goes, well, you did so little that it's like you didn't do it anyways. And I was like, okay. And we started selling speed and methamphetamines.
Yeah.
And that was his drug of choice. He ultimately wound up getting high.
I was just going to say, that's going to be a nightmare for you.
I can't even describe the nightmare. He wound up getting high. Remember that best friend I told you about? She, at this point, had 4 kids. Her life was insane. Yeah, really crazy. And just to bring context to it, she's a diagnosed schizophrenic now. Mm-hmm. But she wound up coming and staying with us. I wound up, selling her food stamps. Yeah, we wound up it turned into a really, really insane time. And Tony could not get clean. So I don't know. God, so much happened. See, because we had a relapse of this too. We stopped doing it and then we started doing it again. As if the first time around didn't go really bad to start with. But we wound up stopping. I had started smoking again. And it was we wound up where he was able to get clean and we stopped selling drugs. And it was like a praise God kind of a thing. And so then we went back to status quo. We're back at meetings, didn't tell anybody that I had that drink. And we just something we didn't talk about, right? Several months goes by, and then we're like, but we still have all this debt. We still have all the debt didn't go away. We weren't good. We weren't good entrepreneurs. So we're like, well, let's try it again. So
that sounds like a bad plan.
That was a bad
plan. Didn't work the first time. Let's do it again.
Yeah. So we did it again. And this time it got 100 times worse. Tony started getting high again. He lost his job. I didn't know, my job was it was not going well. I started having panic attacks. Like the first one I had, I thought I was having a heart attack, and I landed at the emergency room at Saddleback Hospital in Mission Viejo. They run all these tests. I mean, and I went by ambulance. I literally, it was like when you've never had one and you go to 0 to 60 having a panic attack.
It's really scary.
It is very scary.
You think you're going to die.
Yes.
Yeah.
The room is racing. My hands are sweating. I'm clammy. I can't breathe. I can't even formulate a thought. So I'm in the emergency room. Doctors comes in and they've ran all these tests and they're like, how much stress are you under? I'm like, go back and run tests because I know it's not stress. Because remember, I still in the wheelhouse. I can take it.
Right.
Remember, you bring it on. I can take it. I didn't understand the concept of no, I can't take it. And so anyway, so I take some time, but then you start having panic attacks on top of panic attacks. I was so worried about having another panic attack that I'm having more panic attacks.
Right.
And we're selling drugs, and now we have this guy Glenn living in our apartment with us. He's getting high. We have Tony who's not working, and he's getting high. I'm trying to sell drugs, and now he's calling me 20, 30, 40 times a day at work, telling me I'm cheating on him, that I'm not at work, I'm at a motel, because he's hallucinating from the meth. And it's bad. It's horrible. And so going to the kind of like the start of the climax of when all this was taking place, Glenn winds up getting fired from Fry's, because he worked at Fry's too. And now both him and Tony it just was a mess. Tony gets fired from Fry's. He starts working at a cigarette store, when those cigarette stores just started opening up, right? In Orange. Well, then I'm at the apartment, Glenn's at the apartment, and Tony is like, I'm just gonna go clear my head, right? So he leaves. Okay, well, a couple hours goes by and I'm like, he actually wound up getting fired from that cigarette place. So he was not working there. And after a couple hours, I look at Glenn and I'm like, Tony's not back. I think he went to go do something stupid. And I think I know what he went to go do. I'm going to go find out. So I drove to the cigarette place and I'm like, he went to go do a burglary, because I knew that we had conversations about it. So I get to the cigarette store there. It's like off Chapman or Catella or something like that in Orange. And I'm driving this red Ford Probe, like hot red, like it's not as if it's not conspicuous, right? It's inconspicuous. I get there, these sirens and the alarms are going off. It is the audible alarm system.
Right.
So I pull up front and there Tony is with the gate, get me out of here. And I'm looking at him. Now, you got to remember, I got speed, I got scales, I got everything at the apartment. I got and I'm looking and I hear the sirens. And I look at him and I go, I got to go. Like, I can't be here. I'm going to get arrested with you.
Yeah.
If they get here, I'm going to be an accomplice and I have to go. I got in my car and started driving through the parking lot, and me and the Orange Police Department passed each other. I get back to the apartment. Glenn is like, what's going on? I'm like, we just have to wait for the phone call. Tony's going to get arrested and we're going to have to wait for the phone call. The phone call came early in the morning. Okay, Jennifer, I've told them about the drugs. And so they're going to come to the apartment and I'm going to tell you where everything is. Because he's trying to save his own butt, but now he's telling me, I already know where everything is. Are you kidding me? I'm the business person. And but he's telling me because I knew that he's making it seem as though I didn't have a clue and I'm not in on any of it. So he tells me all this stuff. I'm like, okay, no problem. They'll be here within a half hour. Okay, hang up. And I'm thinking, he's lost his flipping mind. You got to remember, when Jim had OD'd in my dad's house, I was getting high that night. You OD'd, I didn't. You're sick. You're the one that got arrested, not me. You're messing with my life. That's profit right there. So I got up, I took the scale, and I took the majority of all the drugs, walked out to my car, put it in my car, walked back in the apartment, and the only thing they had permission to do was walk in my apartment. So when the cops got there, looked at my car, but they didn't have permission to look in my car, right? Walked in the apartment and said, okay. And I'm like, all right, well, this is where he said it was. And it was so little drugs. The cop looked at me and he's like, really, that's all there is? I don't know what to tell you, and I don't know what it is he told you, because he's the one sitting in the police station, not me. And if you go back and listen to the tape, he's the one who told me where everything was. So here it is.
Wow.
So the cop took the little bit that I had left, and he was on his way, and he never could look in my car. So then I sold the rest of the stuff. I started calling bail bondsmen. Drove all the way out to LA and did a signature loan for a bail bondsman. Drove all the way back to the jail, and it was the Lacey jail. Got by like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning the following day. So I'd been up for 36 hours or something. Bailed Tony out of jail. Got in touch with an attorney. Wound up in an attorney's office. Hired the attorney. And Tony's obviously guilty, okay? Common sense. He's obviously guilty. But you're going to do what every criminal does. You're going to plead not guilty, and you're going to figure out a way to make that happen. Only problem is Tony's still getting high. And the attorney is telling me, okay, we're going to have to figure out a way for him to not, he's already been to prison, and he's looking at a prison sentence.
Right.
And so we're like, okay. In the meantime, Glenn gets arrested because he's getting high. More insanity. He gets arrested. Tony keeps getting high. Tony's telling me that Glenn is escaping from jail every single night, coming to the apartment and messing with him. He's telling me now that like it's just more insanity. More insanity because he's smoking the meth. I can't even, the apartment is insanity. My life is insanity. He winds up, Tony had purchased like a bracelet for me that then he told me was stolen. So then I reported it stolen. Well, he was an idiot. He went to Nordstrom's to return it. But the problem was it was reported stolen. So now he's arrested again. So then I'm back at Orange County Jail in Santa Ana off 4th Street at the smaller department, paying for a $500 bail on him, get him out again. Now our attorney is like, well, this is more of a problem now, because now they shouldn't even have released him, because you're not, if you get arrested while you're out on bail, it should have been an immediate bail hold.
Yeah.
But they let him out, and he's like, he's got to get in a recovery house. That's going to be the only saving grace. Mm-hmm. And by the time this happened, remember, my job hadn't been going well. I had already quit my job and started another company, thinking that was going to fix it. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's change jobs. That's going to fix it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then I work it out where, okay, I got a hold of, Hope House in Anaheim. And I think that's a Hope House. It wasn't Unity House. I think it was Hope House. And it's a 6-month program, right? And I'm like, okay, Tony, we're going to take you there. We're going to get you in the intake. So this is going to be the saving grace. So I go to bed. He's up all night getting high. All night. I get up, there's drugs in the shower. He's telling me that I've stole his drugs. He's trying to convince me the drugs in the shower aren't his, they're mine. I go, but I'm not doing meth. I'm not doing meth. That's not my drug of choice. That's not, as long as I didn't have cocaine in front of me, I wasn't doing meth. And so we get him to Unity House, right? Walk in. They go through the intake, they walk out, and they're like, he has to be clean in order for him to enter the program.
That makes no sense to me when they do that.
Right, so we can't accept him. Drive all the way back home, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? Well, now Tony is threatening that he's going to go find Glenn. So now he jumps in his truck, and he's driving all over Garden Grove. And at that moment, I don't know why, again, I remember I had this, when I was 19, I had this moment of clarity. Mm-hmm. I'm like 26, 27 years old, and I have this moment of clarity. And I sit there, I call the bail bondsman, and I'm like, He's a danger to himself and other people, and I don't know what to do. And they're like, you can revoke his bail. I go, then I need to revoke his bail. You understand, my new bosses were Orange County sheriffs, which is really kind of adds another interesting dynamic to this.
Sure does.
And I'm like, how do I revoke his bail? And they go, we fax you over the paperwork. The U.S. Marshals will show up where at your place or your work, wherever it is you're at, and they'll have you sign the paperwork. You give them the keys, and they'll go pick them up. And I'm like, okay.
Is that what happened?
Yeah. I gave him the fax number. I went to my job, and I went to my boss's office, said, papers are coming through from the bail bondsman. Oh, the U.S. Marshals are coming right now. I can't work today, but I need to be here. And my boss was okay. And so I signed the paperwork, handed them my keys, and they went to my apartment. And they said, you'll be able to return to your apartment after the close of your business day today. So at about 4:30, I was able to go back to my apartment. They had thrown my keys back in. And of course, it's an apartment complex. It's off Lamson and Garden Grove Boulevard or something. I don't know, Hester or something like that. And so people from the complex were all coming over. Oh my God, the marshals were here. They took Tony kicking and screaming. It was a big scene. I'm sitting in my apartment, devastated, once again, crying my eyes out, saying, how did I get here? How did I get here, right? Saying I'm more in debt than I know what to do with. I can barely I can barely afford the rent on this apartment. What am I gonna do? So once again, I pull up my bootstraps and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out, right? Glenn came back and he was my roommate for a year. I have all these credit card companies calling me. Tony gets arrested. I get the phone call at 3:00 in the morning, and honestly, it was you bitch. He's yelling at me. And at that point, I'm taking the collect call, and I'm like, you know what, Tony, I can't do this anymore. I'm paying for this phone call, and if you're going to call me a bitch, I'm going to hang up. I can't do this. And I'm like, we'll have a conversation about this later when you're not high. And our life is a mess. So he winds up calling me like every single day. We're going to court hearings, we're going to all this. His dad wound up dying, and his dad was actually his step-grandfather because Tony's real mother was a prostitute. His whole life had been a mess. And of course, he had never dealt with his stuff. And again,
right.
Two people not ever dealing with their stuff, right? So finally, he's calling me, telling me, getting into the whole prison politics, jailhouse politics in TTLG. And I finally the attorney worked it out where Tony could take a 2-year plea. Mm-hmm. And Tony wanted to fight it. And he calls me, and I told him, I said, you know what, Tony, I can't do this. There's one of two options. You can go into that courtroom and plead not guilty, and you're going to be in there by yourself, and I won't be there. Because you and I both know you're guilty. Or you'll take the 2-year plea. I'll be in there, and we'll figure it out together. But I can't do this anymore. So he took the 2-year plea. So I remember, it took time, and he wound up going, to Wasco, to where the holding place mm-hmm. is, wound up in Jamestown. And of course, I did the noble thing, going and visiting him. When his father has passed away, he had a small inheritance and was able to pay off a lot of our debt. Because I was like, look, we did this together. It might be in my name, but we mm-hmm. did this together. So he paid off a lot of the debt. I didn't want to live in the same apartment complex, so I was able to move, a couple miles away, get us into a new apartment. He got out on work furlough 10 months into the plea, which meant he lived at the apartment complex in Garden Grove, technically still incarcerated, but living there, mm-hmm. right? I had a friend who helped him get a job in an Arby's just so he had employment. But then, this is what's funny, is he actually got out before I moved. On work furlough, and they wouldn't let him stay the night with me unless we were married.
Oh.
Another grandiose idea.
Oh.
So he is in work furlough, and we can't be together overnight unless we're married. Well, then it was, what's stopping us from getting married?
Because that sounds like a great idea.
That sounds like a great idea. So we went down to the Santa Ana courthouse. We went to Target, bought a couple cheap little rings, went down to Santa Ana courthouse, justice of the peace, and we got married. Didn't tell anybody. Why? Because remember, everything about what I do has to be a secret. We didn't, this was who needs to know, Tony? We've been living together for, X amount of years. I'm like 27 years old, 28 years old, and now we're like, whatever. Who cares? What does love have to do with it anyways? My parents were separated for 4 years. What does love have to do with anything? And so we got married. And so then when he got out of work furlough and I had the apartment in Santa Ana, we lived there for a year. And then his sister, who was technically his aunt, but became his sister because of the dynamics of his life, she was in the mortgage industry. And she was able to work it out with somebody. And nothing illegal happened in this, but it was really a parting of the Red Sea. And we were able to buy a house. And that's how I landed in Corona. Tony and I bought a house together. I was 29 years old. And now the Thanksgiving of that, I think it was like 1998, the day after Thanksgiving, we're moving into a house in Corona. And it just was wow. And now we're there and we start doing meetings there. But what happened, and this is what led me back to the faith, is Tony's birthday is on January 10th. My mom, shortly, in the time frame of when we were moving to Corona, was placed in the hospital. And it turned out that she had colon cancer. It had metastasized through her entire body. She had surgery to remove the mass, but it had metastasized. We spent Thanksgiving, we spent Christmas, we spent New Year's in the hospital with my mom in the hospital. She was all gung-ho about doing chemo, but remember, she's a quadriplegic with multiple sclerosis, chronic progressive. It's not good.
And she's in a lot of pain. Yeah.
January 10th, 1999, my mom died on Tony's birthday.
Oh.
And that just was, you were just wow. And now mom's gone, but what's grief? I'd never even known what grief was. It's okay, well, this is no different than mom's here, now she's not. The only difference is now she's really not coming back. But it's no different. Mom was here, now she's not. So we went to the memorial service, did all that, but then we all just went back to life as usual. If we didn't talk about grief or how any of that felt. And she was the only child, and so my grandparents were still alive. August, I guess it was probably July of 1999. We're only in the house 8 months. Tony's working at PetSmart now, right? Decides to have an affair with an 18-year-old and get high. And he doesn't come home. And at that point, then we go back and forth because now, he's back on the run of, and I had already started going back to church. A friend of mine had invited me to NA meetings, and Tony and I started doing NA meetings when it was Charter Hospital in Corona. Then that same friend had been inviting me to Crossroads for 5 months, and I kept saying yes, 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 and I just didn't go. And then I remember one weekend I decided to go, and I went, and I liked it, but every feeling that I had of anger, of resentment, of shame, of guilt, all these things was, how can I reconcile the message that I hear and what I like in being here, and the anger and the shame and the guilt and the lack of trust and all these other things I've never dealt with.
It's so tough, though, because a church is made up of wounded people and hurt people. And so typically there's not going to be any church that does it right as a congregation every time.
I didn't have that in my wheelhouse at the time.
Right.
In my wheelhouse was when I was 12 and the church was supposed to be perfect.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And
let's take a break here. I think this is a really good place to take a break. I need to run to the potty and get a drink of water, and then we'll come right back. Okay?
Perfect.